we're going to be on schedule probably to have some amount of time for sort of cumulative questions for all four. As Dr. Kay noticed, there is a bit of a thread here that some of them may connect to one another. This presentation involves a handout. Did everyone get a copy of that? There might actually not. I have an extra if anyone needs one extra one. One over there. And this will be something to follow along. I think Laura's also going to be, oh, that was just for me. Oh. We'll also be using the board a little bit. So, my pleasure now to introduce our third speaker, Laura Morales, who will be talking to us about a postmodern public sphere. Take it away.
Thank you. Welcome. So I'm talking about the public sphere, and this public sphere concept is this multi-spatial kind of space concept, and I think it's virtual and physical. And this public sphere concept is happening within other systems, so within other economical, ecological, and technological systems. And this space that we consider the public sphere is just where people come together and discuss, share, and critically debate ideas on how to handle social problems and establish what is best for a community. So given that that's the kind of like my definition of the public sphere, my thesis topic for my project, I looked at 5 different philosophers. And the definition of the public sphere kind of just expanded as I read along. So my thesis is that the concept of PS, which is just public sphere, expands every single time a philosopher defines it. So therefore I claim that we need this recognition that there's no such thing as a perfect public sphere. That the conversation will always need to keep going. So I call this recognition PS plus, and I'm not adding to their conversation with the philosophers. What I'm doing is just literally standing back and saying, okay, we need to recognize that this public sphere concept will never be perfect because someone will always be left out, considering, you know, this public sphere concept is within other systems. Okay, so now we're going to start. And first I start with 2 ancient Greek philosophers. And first, before we can grasp who they are, let's grasp their overall worldview. So their overall worldview of Socrates and Aristotle is that the world has order, right? There's some type of objectivity out there in the world, and that we should follow that order to establish our cities. And that order in the world is going to tell us who's qualified to rule. So we start with Plato's Republic. So in Plato's Republic, the people that are in the public sphere are just literally the philosophers. So Dr. Hengel, can you even see that?
There.
Right, yeah, that's the point. So in the public sphere of Socrates, if it's just the philosophers getting to decide what's best for the city, because they're saying, okay, in the city, the perfect city, right, the philosophers are going to be able to tell each person what your role in that society is. So if that's the case, nobody gets to, nobody is in the public sphere, it's just the philosophers. So that's not really public. So you can't even see that, and that's the point. It's not a public sphere. So yeah, everybody's excluded, but just because we might be excluded and we might not be the philosophers, that doesn't mean our kids cannot be the philosophers. Because, again, their souls are not dependent on our souls. And that's the metric Socrates used to measure who could be in this ruling sphere, his public sphere. And then we move on to Aristotle. He uses this concept of the polis, the city-state, and the people that are in that public sphere are just like Greek men. Can you see that a little bit? Yeah? Okay, but do you see how it's expanding now a little bit? Yeah? So it's expanding a little bit, and Aristotle uses this nature metric to say who should be able to rule in our society. And he concludes in his politics that men should be able to rule, Greek men should be able to rule, because by nature they're the strongest and they're the ones that, should be able to rule. So he lives out. So he leaves out like a bunch of other people. And when I think of the people that he leaves out, I mean, these are people, they're not just X's on a board, right? So he leaves out women and slaves and non-Greeks. So then, we would move on to Machiavelli, where Machiavelli's worldview is that the world is all chaos, and that it's up to us to decide what we should do with our lives. So everyone could potentially rule, and the book that I used for Machiavelli is The Prince, which we looked at in modern political philosophy, which Dr. Barker helped teach. But this book was really intended for princes, men that rule. But we can argue that consciously this was a shift that was happening in philosophy, that we should be able to, all of us should be able to rule, not just princes. And the metric that he uses is human reason, right? So it's human power, human reason. So because we all have human power, human reason, we should use that human power and human reason to get whatever we want out of life. And then he kind of leaves out cowards and people that lack reason, but then I guess I would really push back against that, saying, you know, people are never outside of a circumstance, so maybe you might be a coward because, again, if the public sphere concept is inside of their other systems, then that means these people that might be left out might, you know, their identities and their lives might be dependent on those other systems, like religious systems. So that's what I mean by that. And then we move on to Kant, which for him I use what is enlightenment, and his worldview is kind of like we can all know things through reason, and that's why everyone is equal. And yeah, again, his is like keeps growing, like intellectually. So this is what happened intellectually, right? So intellectually, the sphere kind of keeps growing. Everyone is in the sphere because we all have human reason. But again, he was writing at a time where women didn't even have rights, and there was still slavery. So intellectually, we see this concept of the public sphere getting bigger and bigger, but socially, it's not matching up. Okay, and then we move on to the worldview of Habermas. And Habermas is kind of interesting. I've never really taken a class with him in it. I just kind of read him on my own. So he is a, I guess you could consider him as a contemporary philosopher. And the book that I used for him was called The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere. And in this book, he kind of goes on. He gives us this historical account of what has happened in the public sphere, and he has said that, you know, in the public sphere, we're not dialoguing about what's important or what we should do about the community. We're actually consuming things. We're not concerned about, like, critically dialoguing. We're concerned about buying more things. So in his worldview is really that the public sphere is to advertise products, and to sway people's opinions, to get them to buy your products or to get them to see your side. So yeah, his public sphere is just consumption, and obviously there's more people in that sphere, right, because more people are able to buy things. But then again, that leaves a lot of people out, because not everyone's going to be able to buy things. And he says this thing where, you know, just because there's more people in the sphere, he almost wants to say that actually that devalues the public sphere, because people are just consuming other people's opinions and not critically debating them. Yes. So, given that, I say that, so like my conclusion is really that, so this concept keeps expanding and expanding, and I really say, like, this circle can never get big enough. Like, we will never be able to include every single person. There's always going to be someone out here for some reason, because I said, you know, this public sphere concept is inside other systems. So if it's inside other systems, like ecological and political and technological systems, that means there's some type of there's some type of private interest within these spheres that's leaving these people out right here. One example that you can think about is who all here has a laptop or a phone or anything electronic? That's like everyone, right? How many times a year does everybody get a new phone? I think I get a new phone like every single year because it breaks or something happens, right? So what do you do after it breaks? You just trash it. You're like, this is worthless. Like, you don't even mail it back. You're supposed to mail it back to the company, right? So what really happens is that waste, that electronic waste, that e-waste, just gets sold to other third world countries, right? Because someone in the sphere is saying, oh, you know, what's best for our community? We need to keep our community safe, and we need to keep our community like free of all this waste. Let's just mail that off somewhere else. Uh-oh, that's leaving somebody else out of like what's the best for everybody. So given that, someone's always going to be left out. So not every single person's interest is going to be in the sphere, and it's always going to keep getting bigger and bigger. And we need to continue it to get bigger and bigger. But it'll never be big enough that everybody will be in it. That's really it. And this concept that I call PS Plus is just this recognition of saying, oh my God, this will never be big enough. We will never all be in the sphere. And someone will always be missing for some reason. And we can't predict why. You know, we can even think of future generations missing from this chart, not even physical people that exist right now. We can think about literally future generations, because if the decisions we're making now within our sphere, like our consumption sphere, are we not damaging our environment right now? Could we potentially not be able to live in the next 100 years, right? So we're literally affecting people that don't even exist yet. And that's PS Plus is just literally the recognition that this is what's going on. So yeah, thank you.
All right, we got time for some questions. Thanks, Laura.
Yeah.
Let me ask one question first,
Okay.
and then I'll follow up with a second. Aren't there people you want to keep out?
Like who?
Misanthropes, psychopaths, people whose goal in life is to damage and harm as many other humans as possible.
Well, I want to push back against that, because if this public sphere space is within other systems, then aren't we creating those psychopaths and all of those people that we're trying to leave out?
I don't know. Maybe. I mean, and here's the second part, and this is a bit unfair. I might just throw it out there as a conversation piece. But for instance, Richard Rorty argues against a lot of this Enlightenment project by saying that this whole idea of a public sphere that implies a certain equality or commensurability between people's ability to dialogue may be the wrong metaphor. And maybe a better one is something like a bazaar, where you've got a bunch of little huts and a bunch of little groups that have to live with each other, and they come in and they interact every once in a while, but then they retreat to their own enclave. And in that, I mean, it's a very different way of metaphorizing things, because with a sphere, you have to be inclusive.
Yeah.
And with this other one, it allows for certain groups to stay out of other people's way, but in a way that they can also live with them.
Yeah.
So what do you think about combining?
See, in my paper, I kind of go way more in detail, and I really say that, in my paper, I really conclude there's no such thing as a public sphere, okay? Because all there is like this private interest groups that have to live among one another, and then you're just interacting between those groups. There's only interaction between those groups, and there's always friction between these groups. You can never not have friction between two groups, because if we're going out for different resources, everybody's always like wants the best for their group, right? So there's always going to be this conflict of interest from whichever way you look at it. So yeah, in my paper, I say, there's this public sphere seems to like be non-existent almost, and like we really just live in private spheres. That's really what I go on to say in my paper. But for the presentation, I need to like cut down so much. Yeah. But did that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
We were talking about philosophers continue to expand what they describe as the public sphere. And I'm going to stress the definition naive individual who's been able to read about Ayn Rand on Wikipedia and decided to be an Ayn Rand person. Now my public sphere isn't public anymore, it's me. We're down to that private thing. And I know there are other groups out there, and when I dump my cell phone, it's going to, I don't give a damn. If they want to take care of their own business, if they're willing to accept these and take the money that we're accepting to them, that's fine with me. Why should I care about anybody outside of my very private sphere as opposed to a public sphere?
So you're saying we should only care about ourselves and nobody else? Why should we care about somebody else?
Why should we?
Yeah, and yeah, see, like, this project really started about kind of like, do we have a responsibility for other people? Like, do we? I don't know, that's like a huge question.
Well, Ayn Rand will say simply, no, of course not.
Of course not. Yeah, okay, but then it's complicated because if you say no, then it's like, we can't really say no until we've reached an age where we can literally, like, reproduce ourselves without somebody else there. And I guess you wouldn't even have to care about somebody else to reproduce with them. But I don't know, I guess we don't seem to be able to live alone. So maybe we don't have to care about other people, but at least we have to act like we do if we want to survive.
I think Ayn Rand spent a lot of time alone.
Yeah.
And there's some people who are happy with that. I mean,
Yeah.
Their whole, back to the fantasy life, it's all in my head and it's all I need, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, we all have our own separate world. Like, we all live our own fantasies and live our own life, like, in our heads. But that's, like, we still have to live with this every day.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we can't go outside of that.
Mm-hmm.
So.
So where's the public come in?
I don't know, it depends. Like, I guess the public comes in when you don't know how to do something and somebody else does. Because, I mean, I guess the public comes in, obviously, because we can never know everything. Or maybe one day we could know everything, but not yet. As of now, we don't know everything. And as of yet, we can't just clone ourselves. I guess we need other people for that. And I mean, I would argue that we can't do this whole living thing alone. I don't know how that would even work. What would be the point of that? What would we do? There's no other people to use it with. Like, there would be no conversations. I mean, if you talk to yourself, yeah. I mean, if you could clone yourself and you could talk to different versions of yourself, that'd be kind of cool. So if it's just, like, you cloned over and over again, maybe that you could live alone with different versions of you. I don't know.
There's a really involved video game that isn't a multiplayer game. Construct my own virtual reality.
Well, yeah, I mean, we do all the time. We have all kinds of virtual realities. And I mean, Anya's way more of an expert with virtual realities than I am. But yeah, I mean, definitely, we could do it, but we can't do it without, we can construct all these virtual realities, but at some point we're going to hit some brick wall that we're going to need somebody else for something. And I don't know what that is. Maybe some X factor. Something, for something, so. Yes.
Yeah, I wonder, this maybe, I take it that kind of part of your argument is actually to get us over the obsession of thinking that the only way to make sense of kind of duties to others is through this abstracted notion of the public.
Mm-hmm.
So that maybe it's not a question of private versus public interest, but that is predicated on the assumption that there is this thing that we understand that is what the realm of the public is. But if the only way we understand that is through these metaphors, which you've called conceptual or merely intellectual, which in practice have always left people out, maybe we just need to stop using the word public.
Yeah.
And that doesn't, if that goes, ethical consideration to others doesn't have to go. We just need a different way to think of the space in which those encounters are happening.
Yeah, and then, see, like, in my paper I say, if in this public sphere space it's problematic because it's a specific group of people defining what is a problem, right? So in my paper I talk about how, I forgot the philosopher's name, but anyway, I quote her and I say, in Aristotle's Polis, there's only one type of excellence, which is male excellence, right? So women, they weren't a problem. Whatever they had to say wasn't a problem because it just wasn't in their, I don't know, it just wasn't in their, literally, it just wasn't in their spirit. They just didn't think that anybody else outside of them had a problem or could handle what would be best for the city. And in my paper, I also talk about how maybe if there's no public sphere, then maybe that means there's no public good or public interest. But that is like, okay, if there's no public interest, then why do we have so many like free handouts, government handouts, or, you know, why do we do things for other people if there's no public interest? That's like so big. That's like so beyond my paper. Because I mean, all I really wanted to say is like, you know, this thing keeps expanding, and yeah, we leave people out, and there's just so many questions you have to ask yourself when you do these kinds of projects, you know? Because I know when we were talking about what we would write about, all of us, or 4 of us, it was so hard to come up with just like one question we wanted to answer with our projects, because there's a million different questions you have to ask yourself, and you have to assume so much when you pick one question that you want to answer. So I can't answer every single question, but the point of this was just to make one train of thought clear. That was really just the point of this project.